Yes, we are live.
Hello everyone, my name is Maureen, I'm Director of Interfaith Scotland. I'm delighted to welcome you all to our Facebook Live event, The Climate Crisis Beyond Politics. This event is being held in celebration of World Interfaith Harmony Week and is our inaugural event for a monthly series called Beyond Climate Crisis. Today's event will focus on the climate crisis beyond politics, and future events will include the climate crisis beyond religion, the climate crisis beyond science, the climate crisis beyond economics. Well, you get the idea. We're hoping that these events will demonstrate that the climate crisis is really beyond anything that humanity has ever faced, and that we need to work together to tackle it. As an interfaith organisation, we've been privileged to work with diverse faith communities across Scotland to look at how, in an interfaith context, we can play our part in highlighting both the crisis we face and the solution we must work towards. As mentioned today, it is the climate crisis beyond politics, and we have three distinguished speakers sharing their thoughts on the panel. Ross Greer, Green Party MSP, Kat Jones from Stop Climate Chaos Scotland, and Ravinder Carnegie, Advisor to the Sikhs in Scotland and Chair of Religions for Peace UK Women of Faith Network. Our first speaker is Ross, and I will share with you his bio and then warmly invite Ross to share with us. So Ross was elected to the Scottish Parliament in 2016 at the age of 21, as both the first ever Green MSP for the West of Scotland and the youngest ever elected member. He speaks for the Greens, whom he joined at the age of 15, on issues including education, culture and the media, Europe and external affairs, and leads a number of cross-party groups, including those on Palestine and Kurdistan. And Ross is a former member of the Scottish Youth Parliament, where he led on the successful campaign for votes at 16, and is an active member of the Church of Scotland, where he's currently working on strengthening the Kirk's support for victims of homophobia. It's a great pleasure to welcome you, Ross, and we're really looking forward to hearing what you're going to share with us today.
Thank you very much, Maureen, and thank you to Interfaith Scotland for having me, or for having me back. I think it's interesting we're starting a Beyond Politics event with a politician as the first speaker up, but I think it's apt actually, because Maureen's absolutely right in what she said a moment ago, that the climate crisis, what we face, this is a far bigger challenge than anything we've ever faced in politics before. But politics is obviously essential to how we tackle it. Politics ultimately is just about human interaction, how we come together and decide how the world that we live in is ran, whether that's the office politics of your workplace right up to the United Nations and negotiations between governments on stuff like the Paris Climate Agreement. So I thought I'd start off by just doing a little bit of scene setting on where we are with the climate crisis at the moment. We're really at the end game of this. We're at the end game of this battle to save the climate. The IPCC, that's the UN's International Panel of Expert Climate Scientists, they've made it very clear that we've got 9 years left if we want to tackle this crisis. At that point, from 2030 onwards, the climate crisis becomes essentially irreversible because of the number of feedback loops. What that means in practice is not that on January 1st, 2030, things start to look immediately cataclysmic. We can already see some pretty cataclysmic stuff happening. Other stuff will take decades before we start to see the very visual, very real evidence of climate breakdown. But from 2030 onwards, there will be so many feedback loops in the chaos that we've caused for the climate that we simply won't be able to reverse that damage. And a feedback loop is something like how our global warming heats up the atmosphere and that melts more permafrost in somewhere like Siberia. That permafrost stores huge amounts of CO2. So when it melts, more CO2 goes up into the atmosphere. That warms up the atmosphere more. That melts more permafrost, which releases more CO2, which heats up the atmosphere. And that feedback loop keeps going. So we're at that critical point now in this decade between now and 2030, where we absolutely can reverse this. We can fix this problem. We can fix this crisis. But if we don't do it now, by that point, so much of it will have been baked in that we simply won't be able to undo much of the damage. We're already seeing the effects of this. You've seen in Texas in the last week, extreme weather events, hugely cold temperatures in places that have never experienced them before. Sadly, people literally freezing to death in their beds because they were so unprepared for what was coming. Taking it back to Scotland, though, and what we can do about it. There's a wee bit of a disconnect in Scotland between the reality and the rhetoric and how well we're doing at tackling the climate emergency. There's a lot of talk about Scotland being a world leader on tackling the climate crisis. And to some extent, that's true. Scotland is a world leader on setting targets for how we tackle the climate crisis. What we're not quite as strong on is the actions that are required to actually meet those targets. And targets don't mean very much unless you follow through with the actions that actually see the effect that the climate really needs. So, for example, we're still set to spend billions of pounds on new motorway projects that will not only themselves result in a huge amount of emissions, but will result in more cars on the roads, causing more emissions. We are beginning to reforest Scotland. We've lost a huge amount of our native forests over the last couple of centuries, but we're beginning to reforest it. The problem is the pace at which we're doing it is so slow. It would take 150 years for Scotland to get to the European average for forest cover. And in a country like Scotland, we could actually go beyond the European average. We can plant far more trees than that, but we don't have 150 years to do this. We've got the next 10 years, which are absolutely critical, and the next 30 years, that's what really matters. Transport emissions in Scotland are actually going up. Lots of areas we've managed to reduce our emissions. Electricity is a great example. A lot of our energy needs we've transferred away from things like coal-fired power stations have closed. Far more is generated from renewables. But in transport, emissions are going up because more people are getting in their cars, fewer people are on buses, for example, take aside what the pandemic's done in the last year. So we've still got a lot to do there. But that all sounds a bit depressing. Good stuff is happening. For example, a couple of years ago, we managed to ban kelp dredging in Scotland. Dredging is where ships drop their equipment and literally scrape the seabed, scrape everything off the bottom of the seafloor. And in this case, they're doing it to harvest the kelp because they can use that as a product and sell it. But kelp is really, really important. Scotland's kelp forests are a massive carbon sink. They absorb a huge amount of carbon emissions that would otherwise be released into the atmosphere. These ships wanted to harvest the kelp. That would have released a lot of carbon emissions. We managed to ban that. Another example would be later this year from this summer, one that I'm really proud of because it started off as a Young Greens idea and then we got it into a Scottish budget, is every young person in Scotland, everyone under the age of 18, will be able to travel on the bus for free from later this year. And our goal is to expand that. So it will be under 19s from August, but the goal is to keep expanding that. Under 26s, obviously, those over the age of 60 have that available to them already. We want to expand that to other modes of public transport and to every other age group eventually. And that idea of totally fare-free public transport, that's not just theory. Other countries are doing that already. So we've got brilliant examples, but Scotland's making that next step towards free public transport use this year, which is critical given what I just said about how transport emissions from cars are going up. And we saw this week that there's massive public appetite for the kind of big positive transformational changes that we need to save the planet. Scotland's Citizens' Assembly, a randomly selected group of people from across the public, put their report out, and that report was really clear. They want to see big, bold action from government at every level and from communities. So really, really positive that there's a lot of appetite. So to round off, how do we make that happen? How do we harness that big public energy for change and actually get the change we want to see, especially at my level, at political level? Well, the first, the most obvious thing is there's an election coming up. And in elections, politicians need votes. Ultimately, that's the only thing that we are measured by is votes every 5 years. We know the two things this election is definitely going to be about. Clearly, it's going to be about the pandemic and the recovery from it, and it will obviously also be about independence or staying in the UK. Those are the two big political issues in Scotland. We all have a responsibility to make the third big issue of this election the climate. And that's for one really simple reason. This is our last chance to have a climate election. The next Scottish election will be in 2026. You can't have an election in 2026 and then implement stuff in time for your 2030 cutoff date. This election this year has to be the climate election. We need every party to be pledging to do some really transformational stuff. And what we really need is more people to be turning out to hustings, more young people especially, turning up to hustings, especially now they're mostly going to be online. It's really easy to do that from your own house. Lobby politicians and candidates, put pressure on us, demand more. No matter what we say, and I include myself in this, no matter what I pledge at the election, you should be demanding that we do more than that. Keep pushing us further, because that's how we can deliver change. The other big opportunity we've got is COP26, the UN climate summit that is coming to Scotland, that's coming to Glasgow later this year. This could literally be the conference that saves the world. Every world government is coming. The whole of the international climate movement will be there. It's our chance to get a global agreement on the kind of change we need to see. But locally, it gives us an amazing opportunity to campaign between now and then. To give one example, what would be an amazing show of support in Scotland for the global climate movement, a demonstration of our commitment, would be if we took the £2 billion that our public pension funds have invested in fossil fuels, in oil and gas and coal, and divested it, took that money out of those dirty polluting industries and put it into industries of the future, put it into building warm homes, put it into renewables. That's a campaign everyone can get involved with. These pension funds, they're ultimately governed by councillors and by representatives of folk who work in the public sector. Get involved in these campaigns like Divest Strathclyde, Divest Lothian, Friends of the Earth Scotland run a lot of these. What an amazing example of Scotland's commitment to climate justice it would be if we could get to November, have the whole of the rest of the world arrive here, and we've just divested £2 billion from fossil fuels and put it into those clean industries. So there's a huge opportunity for change, massive opportunities this year. But as I said at the start, the clock is ticking. We need to treat this like the massively urgent issue that it actually is. So I'm really looking forward to hear what Kat and Ravinder have to say about how we can deliver that kind of change.
Thank you, Ross. That was, as always, very informative, and still such a challenging subject, you know, and you've still managed to make it sound upbeat. So thank you for that. And you managed to share with us what we can do in terms of politics without going down party political lines. So I thank you for that as well. I think that's really, really important. Because this is beyond politics, as we said, and it's about all political parties really stepping up to the mark, and not just political parties, but all of us. So thank you very much. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce Kat Jones from Stop Climate Chaos Scotland. Kat works for Stop Climate Chaos Scotland, a coalition of over 50 civil society groups working together on climate campaigning. Her role is to prepare to host global civil society coming to COP26 and to create momentum within Scottish civil society. She has worked previously for RSPB Scotland, the Scottish Parliament, and Scottish Natural Heritage. She has a PhD on the breeding behaviour of the much aligned, I'm not sure why it's much aligned, lesser black-backed gull, and enjoys calling for her ceilidh band when she gets the time. Kat, it's a real pleasure to have you with us this afternoon. We look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maureen, and thank you for the invite. It's a pleasure to be able to return the favour that Ravinder and yourself gave us when you spoke very eloquently on our podcast that we did about faith and climate. So it feels like you're kind of getting your own back, inviting me to do this talk. So I'm very grateful to be asked. So I suppose if we were doing this talk 15 years ago, you might have chosen to call it climate change beyond science, because at that stage, climate change had yet to reach into politics at all. It had barely touched politics. It was before the Scottish Parliament's first Climate Act in 2009. And although there was a lot of concern amongst specialists, and of course the COPs had already been going for 10 years, it really wasn't something that was in general discourse in the political arena. So sort of fast forward 15 years, we are fortunately not in that place now. But this is really only because over the past year or so, that it's that everyday politics has become concerned with it. And my view, it's only got to that stage that it's reached the political sphere because climate as an issue rushed straight beyond politics and out into the public realm. It's because over the last couple of years, the climate strikers, XR, and also the extreme impacts of what we're seeing on our screens, you know, exceeding all worst case scenarios, wildfires, flooding, and things like that. It's brought climate change to the front of all of our minds. And that has it's basically shot climate from kind of being talked about by a few scientists, campaigners and really interested people into the public realm, and kind of pretty much the politicians, I feel, are kind of like, woof, what happened there? When I was preparing this, I did a quick search for current articles that are in the press on climate, and one from Tuesday in The Guardian jumped out at me. Headline was, "Climate crisis hits worst case scenario levels." The CEO of the Environment Agency says extreme flooding in the UK indicates urgent need for change if humanity is to survive. So, you know, pretty bleak headline from Tuesday. What the CEO of the Environment Agency was saying was that climate emergency is already hitting worst case scenario levels, and if left unchecked will lead to collapse of ecosystems with dire consequences for humanity. And that in recent years, several of the reasonable worst case scenarios have been exceeded in the UK. So he was urging politicians to take action and adapt to the inevitable impacts of this emergency. But he wasn't talking to politicians in his talk. He was talking to the British Insurers Association. And even if politicians don't listen to those who are losing their homes due to flooding, or emergency services who are picking up the pieces, they're definitely going to listen to the insurers, because nothing gets built and nothing happens unless it can get insurance. So this kind of led me to think, well, do you know, we're all members of the climate movement now. Even the British Association of Insurance, they're in the climate movement. And obviously, climate breakdown takes this as an issue as beyond politics. It is of huge concern to everybody. It is about whether we can live comfortably on our planet. And this links to lots of the things that were just said by Ross in his presentation. And when we're hearing such dire warnings related to climate impacts in the UK, we can see we've reached the stage at which the issues have reached way beyond science, scooted past politics without pausing for breath, and rushed out into society, where it's causing a lot of anxiety and concern, and it's making us all into climate activists, whether we like it or not. And if you think about those dire warnings in the UK, we're one of the richest countries in the world, despite COVID and Brexit, and we've unrivaled infrastructure and skilled people, access to finance. And then if you think about what he's saying about what's happening now and in the near future in the UK, and think about what it's like for those countries in other parts of the world where they are having the impact, feeling it right now, and have much less ability to deal with disasters, much less infrastructure, much less funding. And this is where we come to an area of talking about climate justice, a concept many of you on the call will be familiar with. It's that the places in the world that are suffering the most from climate change are the least responsible for it, and are paying the costs for the riches that we've built up for ourselves over the last 100 or 200 years, while busy polluting our shared home that is impacting people all over the world. So this shifts talk about climate way beyond science, technology and politics into the realm of the moral and the ethical. And I think, you know, with a talk hosted by Interfaith Scotland, this is a place that's very comfortable for many faith groups where they are already active and engaged. But talking about climate justice and framing our arguments in this way, as opposed to it being kind of quick techno-fix solutions, needs to take the talk beyond politics. But then it doesn't take it beyond, it takes it beyond politics, then it throws it right back into the political sphere. And this is where we really need the engagement of people. Politicians care about climate because the arguments have gone beyond politics and are owned by the people. It's the Friday for the Future's marchers, the ordinary people who are getting mobilised about climate. And it's the faith groups who are having these discussions in their own gathering places that are forcing politicians to really think about it. And this is where we need to ensure that the arguments around climate justice are also being heard. So sometimes the solution that could be obvious is actually not the solution. If you think the quick and easy answer to reducing pollution from cars is for everyone to drive an electric car, then you might want to ask the question, if we were concerned with justice as well as climate emissions, what would we choose to do? And if you look closer on the impacts of lithium batteries and other mining of trace elements that are needed for some technologies, you'd see the gross human rights abuses and the extraction of value from countries that are already suffering the impacts of climate and other injustices, to ensure that we don't have to change our lifestyles very much to meet our climate targets. And then you might be asking, is that the right decision to make? And these difficult decisions are hard to take by politicians who do tend to be driven and concerned about how things affect people in Scotland and in the UK. But what we really need is they do listen to people, and we need people to get really engaged with these issues, and for faith groups, especially, to be speaking the language of ethics and justice when they are speaking to their politicians about climate. The question to ask really is a climate solution that increases injustice any kind of climate solution at all? Justice is perhaps not a word you hear much in politics, except where spoken in the context of criminal justice. But in Scotland, we do have a government that is used to talking in the language of justice. It isn't something within the lexicon of our Westminster leaders, but in Scotland, we have a climate justice fund, we have talk about just transition and things like this. And we need to build up our leaders into feeling comfortable about talking about things in this way. So I suppose the next question is, where in this beyond politics world, where we as people need to be setting the tone and the direction and help the politicians to run to keep up, how do we get involved? What do we do? So SCCS has been working within the political sphere, doing advocacy and influencing inside track policy making, as you might say, for around 13 years. And our members represent the widest breadth of civil society, including faith groups, community groups, NGOs, trade unions, but mainly members who are interested as climate as a core part of their remit. But we are changing. The nature of the crisis demands it. You know, the awareness that school strikers have brought about and the keenness to engage in COP is showing that many groups and organisations which don't have climate as part of their remit are getting involved in climate work. And we need to encourage it more. For example, climate change might not seem 10 years ago have seemed to be part of the work of health and social care professionals, but tomorrow I'm chairing a workshop with health and social care professionals and people from the disability groups to talk about the impacts of climate on their sector and how to get involved. And we need to bring in engineers, teachers, builders, taxi drivers, factory workers, and everybody else to be involved with solving this as an issue and to bringing this together. I'd be really interested in hearing your views, if we can have feedback during questions and answering questions from you, and seeing how we can take this discussion beyond politics and then circle it right back and take it back into the politics where we really need to be to make the difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Kat. Similar to Ross, difficult subject, but very upbeat, and giving us the kind of a sense that actually we can get out there and we can really do something. And I'm so glad that you just touched on the idea of justice. And just in case those that are with us on this Facebook Live don't know, that in the debating chamber of the Scottish Parliament, we have a symbol, if you like. It's called the mace that sits right in the heart of the debating chamber of the Scottish Parliament. And carved into that mace are the values of Scotland, and they are integrity, wisdom, justice, and compassion. So that is really supposed to be right at the heart of the Scottish Parliament, and I would hope right at the heart of Scottish society. So thank you for mentioning that we cannot solve the climate crisis by becoming more unjust, you know, in terms of the way that we live in our comfortable Western environment, particularly if it has really negative implications and impacts on those that are living in the South, so to speak. So thank you again, Kat, and it now gives me great pleasure to introduce our final panelist, Ravinder Carnegie. Ravinder is the chair of Religions for Peace UK Women of Faith Network, a former member of the International Women's Coordinating Committee of the Global Women of Faith Network. She was also co-chair of Religions for Peace European Women of Faith Network from 2006 to 2014, and is currently a member of their executive board. She is a patron of Alma Royalton Quiche Interfaith Youth Trust in London and the Sikh representative on the Scottish Religious Leaders Forum and advisor to Sikhs in Scotland. She also served from 2000 to 2015 on the executive committee of the Interfaith Network for the UK and introduced Interfaith Week as chair of Scottish Interfaith Council. She is an honorary Sikh chaplain at Glasgow University. Ravinder is an experienced educationalist who has taught in the primary and secondary sector for 32 years and has worked in the interfaith field for over 30 of those. She was awarded the Scottish Asian Woman's Lifetime Achievement Award in 2013. So Ravinder, it's a great pleasure to have you with us today, and we're looking forward very much to hearing what you have to share with us. So thank you, Ravinder.
Thank you very much, Maureen. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. Warm greetings, sisters and brothers. It is an honor and a privilege to be asked to speak today. You know, when you look at the Earth from space, it is one planet. There are no borders between the seas, the mountains, and the land. It is one planet on which all species should live in harmony. And as the Earth's stewards and custodians, we have a responsibility to safeguard, heal, protect, and facilitate the flourishing of all life. Now today, as we stand at the brink of environmental disaster, and as Ross said, we have 9 years left to change the apathy and the refusal by many to accept that we are in a climate crisis. The coming together of scientists around the world to find a vaccine for the COVID-19 virus is unprecedented, and the sheer human determination to find a cure is what is needed for the climate crisis. If we are to avert a catastrophe, we need to have the same determination to make a significant impact in the coming decade. If we stay on our current course, we can expect increasingly devastating natural disasters, widening shortages of food and water, mass migration, and threats to human health and security. These effects will hurt all of us, but mostly those who are already struggling with extreme poverty. To make a difference, we first have to change our mindsets, to recognize that for deep and enduring change, the human mind is our most effective renewable source. There is nothing we cannot do if we put our mind to it. To transform it requires a shift in our life perspectives and underlying values. In this work, the world's religions have an important and under-recognized contribution to make. 80% of the human population belong to a faith. We need to look at the wisdom in religious scriptures to recognize our shared values and responsibilities to care for a world that has been entrusted to us. As a Sikh, I am informed from my morning prayer that our planet Earth is a dharamsal, a sacred place of worship, orbiting in the cosmos with its cycle of days, nights, and seasons. Air is the guru, water is the father, and earth is the great mother of all. Instilling feelings of deep gratitude towards nature, which, like a parent, selflessly and lovingly nurtures and sustains human beings. Sikhs are urged to live responsibly in the world and to inspire others to do so. And with this legacy of inspiring others in mind, as chair of Religions for Peace UK Women of Faith Network, on International Women's Day 2020, we launched a project called Let Earth Breathe, Plant Trees at the Nishkam Centre in Birmingham. Trees are the lungs of the planet. Trees which have played an important role in many religions. For example, the holiest shrine of the Sikhs, the Harmandir Sahib, commonly known as the Golden Temple. There are 3 centuries-old trees of historic and sacred significance. The Buddha attained spiritual enlightenment while sitting under the Bodhi tree. Jesus sat with his disciples in the olive grove before being betrayed. Prophet Muhammad broke his fast by eating a date from a tree. The project is a simple, concrete method whereby individuals, families, schools, places of worship, businesses, city councils plant a symbolic tree of peace, thereby helping to negate carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere. The project was hoping to develop peace growth throughout the UK and later on in the world, but then we had lockdown and everything was put on hold. The symbolic act of planting this tree would enable discussion on the climate crisis and what can be done individually and collectively in preparation for COP26 in Glasgow. Now, the event in Birmingham concluded with the planting of a tree of peace in the grounds of the Gurdwara in Birmingham, and a simpler planting took place in Edinburgh, led by the moderator of the Church of Scotland, the Right Reverend Colin Sinclair. Another piece of work that UKWFN did was that at the first World Assembly on Women, Faith and Diplomacy, we led a workshop on the role of women in protecting the earth. The workshop showcased examples of inspirational women, such as Venerable Master Shi Shengyen and her recycling movement that she started 30 years ago, and the achievements of the Nobel Peace Prize winner, Professor Wangari Maathai, who led campaigns to protect land and led a movement of mass tree planting in Kenya. A Muslim perspective was shared by Dr. Husna Ahmed, who built the campaign for a greener Hajj. And we need to see how we can all make all our religious festivals much more greener. But I would like your help with a colossal project being taken forward in Africa called the Great Green Wall. It is an African-led movement with an epic ambition to grow a massive wall of trees, about 8,000 kilometers, natural wonder of the world, across the entire width of Africa. It is only 15% complete. The initiative is already bringing life back to Africa's degraded landscapes at an unprecedented scale, providing food security, jobs, and a reason to stay for the millions who live along its path. Aparna, could we show the short video before I finish, please?
My home is embattled by desertification and drought, migration and conflict. Restoring the land is a matter of survival. It's up to us to create an African dream.
Some of the things that are coming around more practically around COP coming to Glasgow, places of worship, faith communities generally have a very a sort of drive to hospitality, to welcome. And you know, we are, if COP goes ahead as we're anticipating, expecting global civil society to be arriving on our doorsteps in Glasgow. And Ravinder and Maureen and I have been in many discussions how the faith communities can support that through various things. You know, we'll be looking for people to sign up to a platform for people to offer their spare rooms for activists to stay in, like halls and perhaps office spaces that might be owned by places of worship, put those up as places people could use for their office spaces, for meetings, for events, and also just to get involved in all the different mobilisations and activities that are happening around COP. So that's sort of my rather long response. I better let someone else have a say.
Would anyone else like to respond to that particular question? Or I'm very happy to move on to another one. Ross or Ravinder, do you want? Yeah, Ross, please do comment.
Yeah, so just two things that immediately jump to mind for me is, in the first instance, those of us from faith communities need to make sure that our own house is in order. I would use the Catholic Church as a great example of that. They're in the process of divesting $40 billion worth of their assets that were invested in fossil fuels. They're taking them out of fossil fuels and putting them into more ethical investment processes. My church, the Church of Scotland, has not been nearly as active on that front. This has been a really difficult internal issue for us. I think we're getting there. But anyone who's part of an organised faith community that has that kind of infrastructure, any faith community that has staff probably has a pension fund, pension investments. Make sure that your investments are clean. Make sure your own house is in order, because I know that when my church are going to lobby MSPs, that if the MSPs turn around to them and say, well, you're trying to push us to do more, but you've not done it. You need to make sure that you're coming at it from a position where you can't be accused of hypocrisy. And the other thing is just truth telling. I think faith communities have an ability to tell the truth and to be bold in what we're saying in a way that politicians don't. And the practical example here in Scotland and the UK would be, most politicians, certainly the Scottish and the UK governments, will all say we're committed to climate justice, we need to do more to tackle the climate crisis, but are also committed to maximum extraction of oil and gas from the North Sea past 2050, never mind past 2030, past 2050. Faith communities should be able to stand up and say, well, no, you can't do both of those things. That's not possible. What we need is an approach rooted in justice. Justice for those in the global south who are already suffering because of the climate crisis. Justice for the workers in these industries who will need a transition to new secure jobs. That's something that's very, very difficult for politicians to talk about, because politicians need votes, and that includes the votes of people who work in these areas and who are really concerned about the fact those industries might come to an end. Faith communities are in a different place, and if we can't tell the truth, I think none of us are being honest followers of the faith that we proclaim to follow.
Thank you, Ross. Ravinder, and it was you would like to make a comment too.
Yeah, I think I'd just like to add that we need to be the moral voice of the politicians and for the whole of humanity as well. Those who are voiceless, we need to be their voices. But just to add that, how you can make a difference. Some people can't do the big things, but we can all do small things within our own places of worship. We can have a look to see how green is our place of worship. I mean, for example, there are organizations like eco-congregations, eco-synagogues, eco-6, etc. You could go to their websites and see how you can help. Are you recycling in your places of worship? Are you also having a look at the wisdom in your religious scriptures and then saying to others as well, look, this is what we should be doing. So you can do things in a small way within your own faith communities, within your families as well. So as well as signing up to the big sign-ups and advocacies that Ross and Kat have mentioned.
Thank you. I'm just having a look to see if there's some other questions. Yes, we have some other questions. And I thank you for your answers to that. And I want to say that, faith communities are part of society, and there'll be people watching today that will have no particular religious tradition, that could be humanist, could be atheist. We're actually all in this together. It's one human race. Whatever your belief structure or non-belief structure, we all inhabit this planet, and there's so many things that we can do as individuals. One of the benefits perhaps of being part of a community is that you're part of a community, that you have large numbers of people to lobby with you, but we can do such a lot as an individual. I'm ashamed to say, just this Saturday, I looked at my pension, which I've only had for 3 years, and discovered that it wasn't put into an ethical pension. I switched it. It took me all of 20 minutes to switch it, the same pension company, into their ethical portfolio, to discover that actually it was 2 or 3% better return than their non-ethical portfolio. Now, some of you watching will maybe be in school and will not be thinking about your pensions, but so you have to look at your circle of influence. What can you do as a young person? What can you do from your faith community? What can you do within, if you're involved in politics and within your political party? There's all of us can do something. But I'm going to go now to another question that's come in, which is, has COVID shifted the climate crisis as a priority for policymakers? So has COVID made the climate crisis more or less central on the political agenda? Maybe I'll direct that first of all to Ross.
Yeah, you could answer that both ways. You could say it's on the one hand, it's made it much harder just because there's less space in the headlines for anything that isn't really, really directly pandemic related. But I actually think, as much as short term, that's been a bit of a challenge for those of us trying to keep the climate on the agenda. Long term, there is opportunity is the wrong word, because obviously none of us wanted to be in this situation. The pandemic isn't something we wished for. But what the pandemic has proven, or more accurately, what our response to the pandemic has proven, is we can do big things, and we can do big things in really, really short spaces of time. Whether it's the vast amounts that governments across the world have done to protect their population, to protect people's jobs, the manufacture of the vaccine, as Ravinder mentioned, just an incredible feat of science that to have got multiple viable vaccines, not just produced, but now into mass production and being issued. We've proven that we're capable of doing massive stuff really quickly. And one of the things that we're often told in the climate movement when we're pushing for big change is, that's too big, or that's too quick, it'll take much longer than that. No, the last year has proven that you can do it all, and you can do it really quickly if you've got the political will to do it. The other opportunity is the recovery from the pandemic. There's a lot of talk at the moment about how the last year has really shown just how unequal our society was in the first place. You know, far, far more people living in poverty have died from COVID-19 than people living in the most privileged community. Far more disabled people have died from COVID-19 than those who are not. All sorts of inequalities have been revealed. You know, I see it in education, what happened last year with the exams fiasco and how that massively discriminated against working class young people. So there's a lot of chat now about how do we recover in a way that doesn't just go back to the old normal. Well, we've got an opportunity now. You think of something like public transport. Public transport use has obviously cratered over the last year in a lot of places, but we have an opportunity to say, well, instead of just going back to what was there before, why don't we try and dramatically, radically improve it? Like my local primary school, we have a massive problem with air pollution outside that primary school. Tiny school playground, kids normally going in and out every day, busy main road, really serious public health issue. What I want to do is make sure people don't just go back into their cars when this is all over and the kids are going back to school through the dirty air. What we need in that local area is to transform the local rail line, to get bus routes back on that main road. We can build back better. So we've got an opportunity to say we have to rebuild. Everyone agrees we have to recover. That's obvious. But how do we do it? We can recover in a way that doesn't just rebuild from this crisis, but that stops this massive impending breaking crisis with the climate.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to ask another question, although perhaps Ravinder and Kat would have some thoughts on this, but you answered that so well that I think we'll move on to another question. A really interesting question has come in from Dan Boardman. Thank you, Dan. He said, what advice do the panel have for conversing with friends and family that are apathetic or dismissive when it comes to climate change, particularly in how to encourage them that it is possible to make a difference? So that, I mean, there can be apathy out there. How do we tackle that? How do we, I mean, I'm enthused by your enthusiasm, but let's put it to any of the panel, please, just to reply to that. Okay, Kat, please.
Well, that's a really good question. I think that, you know, if we can really put forward a positive vision for what we're trying to achieve, it can go a long way to bringing people along with us. I think it is important that people know sort of the dangers and the impacts and things, but actually that's not what brings people along. That can actually lead some people to say, well, what can we really do about it? That's so big, it's beyond us. Can we even do anything? But I think giving a vision that works for people, if you can say, look, we want people to have warm homes that are insulated. We want people to be able to access their workplaces and their opportunities easily and close by. We don't want people to have to spend an hour and a half traveling in a car to get somewhere for their work. You know, that nobody likes that. A lot of the stuff that is impacting on our planet is also impacting on human beings and our qualities of life. And we need to have that sort of vision of where we're making things better, and also giving people a sense of agency that they can make a difference themselves, and also appealing to people's humanity and their kind of moral compasses, because most people will identify with stories of injustice and want to make that better. And so, you know, talking about stories like Ravinder's story about the the Green Wall. I mean, it's really encouraging. It's like there's something, people might say, oh gosh, the advance of the Sahara, what on earth can we do about it? And it's so tragic and it's terrible and we're just going to have to sit and wring our hands. But people who live there are making a difference. They're getting up and every day and they're doing their stuff. And I think we need to sort of celebrate where people are doing that and support them and direct people to how they can help and get connected in with communities that are making a difference.
Thank you, Kat. Ravinder, you want to respond to this too?
I mean, I agree with everything that you've said, Kat. Yeah, I think people need to, young people need to sort of link into the positive stories, as you've said, because there is a lot of negative out there, and people do get overwhelmed with, you know, we're just going to, this is something so big that we can't really make a difference, but every little thing helps. And I think the media have a lot to answer for as well, because they need to put out all the positive stories and the things that people can get involved with, not just the special, you know, little programs that David Attenborough does or some other like Country File they do. We need to have those stories constantly on social media so that people can see, yes, there are concrete actions that they can get involved with and that are making a difference, whether it's a small difference or a large difference. And for example, in the Great Green Wall project, in Senegal, they have made so much difference in actually producing food and fruit and for the communities who are living there, that it has had a massive impact. And if we can help in any way to plant those trees, help fund that, and then I think the carbon capture from the atmosphere would be great, and the oxygen that is given us that we need in order to breathe. So concrete action, small.
Yeah, thank you. I think, Dan, that was a great question, because, you know, we can't bury our heads in the sand in this one, and everyone has to get on board. And I wanted to just say something. Since we've got a politician in our midst, I don't know why we don't ban plastic bags, because actually what people are doing is paying the 5 pence and still having the plastic bag. It's not actually, you know, I don't think, and I mean, if we banned plastic bags, people would just start taking cloth ones with them. And it seems like a really simple thing to put in, to say, you know, but anyway, that's just one little thing that comes to my mind that would a politician could surely say, let's just not do it. We only have a couple of minutes left, so it's down to me now to say thank you so much. Thank you, Ross, Kat, and Ravinder. It's this hour has passed so quickly because everything that you've had to say has just been on the nail, really interesting, really important. I want to thank all of you who've put in questions. It was great to get that engagement with you. We can't see your faces, but we know you're out there in the ether somewhere, and it's fantastic. And I've seen from Aparna that over 65 people have engaged with us, and we will put this out, and hopefully lots more will also hear the wisdom that has come from all of you. And it's great to see diversity here as well from different faiths, and a huge thank you from Interfaith Scotland. And I think that this will be a wonderful contribution to World Interfaith Harmony Week. So thank you, and all the best, and all the best to everyone who's listening as well. Yeah, enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thanks, Maureen.
Thank you, Maureen.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ross. Thanks, Ravinder. Thanks.